about a unanimous vote, to which I said, maybe you should be doing my job, because I don't get one vote. You know that it was it, did anybody vote against it? Even Rand Paul voted for it, right? Because Rand Paul's an automatic no vote. He's not a Democrat vote, but he's an automatic no. Everybody voted. I think it was just about unanimous. I can't believe it. She came home.
Look at what we just witnessed, because this is the entire Republican Party in microcosm, distilled into one nauseating moment of authoritarian spectacle and casually deployed cruelty, and the fact that Republican Party has become a party about loyalty to one person, as Rand Paul himself now observes, means we are watching in real time the dissolution of democratic norms into a puddle of sycophantic submission before a man who cannot resist the pathological urge to humiliate anyone who dares exhibit even a shred of intellectual independence or moral courage. Trump just stood there at what should have been a moment of legislative celebration, praising bipartisanship, praising unity, and then his reptilian brain couldn't help itself, because authoritarians always need to remind everyone in the room who holds the whip and who feels its sting. So he pivots seamlessly from congratulating his own wife on getting a unanimous vote to sneering about Rand Paul being an automatic no vote, and you can hear the room's uncomfortable laughter because everyone knows this is a loyalty test disguised as a joke, a calculated act of ritual humiliation that serves to reinforce the hierarchy, while reminding every single Republican senator and representative that if you step out of line even once, if you vote your conscience even occasionally, you will be mocked, you will be primaried, you will be destroyed. This is how authoritarianism works, and I want you to understand the playbook here, because Trump has used ritual humiliation to make the GOP his personal tool, and in classic autocratic tradition, the more submissive Republican elites are with Trump, the more he openly scorns them, which is precisely what we're seeing, as he casually tosses Rand Paul under the bus, in front of the entire Washington establishment. The truly diabolical genius of this moment lies in its performative cruelty, because Trump is essentially saying to every Republican in that room, and watching across the country, that even when you do vote with me, even when you support my agenda, I will still publicly degrade you if you've ever had the temerity to think for yourself. And Paul has occasionally clashed with Trump since he first became president in 2017, and notably declined to endorse him in 2024, which means Paul committed the ultimate sin in Trump's authoritarian universe by refusing total capitulation. The bombshell here is that this isn't just Trump being Trump with his trademark boorishness and thin-skinned vindictiveness. This is the manifestation of a deeply troubling transformation within conservative politics, where identifying as a Republican is not about conservative governing principles, but automatic loyalty to Trump, with his MAGA troops in control of the party machinery from top to bottom. And what that means in practice is that we now have one of America's two major political parties operating not as a democratic institution with competing ideas and internal debate, but as a personality cult where dissent is punished, independence is crushed, and the dear leader's ego must be constantly serviced, even at the cost of basic human dignity and institutional integrity. And here's what makes this moment so infuriating and so clarifying all at once, because Rand Paul is signaling he could be a thorn in Trump's side as part of ongoing Republican infighting over how to pass Trump's agenda, with Paul raising concerns about Trump's agenda costing too much, and being the only GOP senator to vote against the Trump-backed government funding bill, which means Paul is one of the vanishingly few Republicans still willing to apply even minimal fiscal scrutiny to Trump's sprawling authoritarian project. Paul has opposed Trump's mass deportation plans, his tariff schemes, his profligate spending, his abuse of emergency powers, and for exhibiting this bare minimum of principled conservatism, Trump recently lashed out at Paul, calling his ideas actually crazy, over Paul's criticism of a tax bill's impact on the national debt. Let me connect this to what's happening right now in December 2025, because the patterns are escalating and the stakes are rising, and we need to see how this petty humiliation of Rand Paul fits into a much larger authoritarian consolidation. Just days ago, Trump issued directives to red states including Indiana to redraw congressional maps to bolster Republicans' razor-thin House majority, and when resistance emerged, Trump issued nasty missives attacking local leaders while threatening to back primary opponents, and when Indiana gave Trump a massive political black eye by rejecting his push to create 2 more GOP-friendly House seats, it represented one of the most significant Republican defections we've seen. Indiana Republican senators faced swatting attempts, with one grandmother of 8 saying that when her grandson asked if Trump called Minnesota's governor the R-word, "That's when I decided to vote no." And another senator who has a daughter with Down syndrome was offended by Trump's use of a slur for people with disabilities. The sheer authoritarian audacity is staggering because Trump lashed out on social media calling senators weak and pathetic, writing any Republican that votes against this important redistricting, potentially having an impact on America itself, should be primaried, and roughly a dozen Republicans in the Indiana Senate saw their lives turned upside down, while Trump pushed to redraw the state's congressional map, with lawmakers who consider themselves loyal party members never imagining they would be doing their jobs under the same shadow of violence that has darkened American political life. When Trump's gerrymandering scheme failed spectacularly, it was one of the most brutal and humiliating failures of Trump's second term, yet Trump immediately tried to gaslight everyone by claiming he wasn't working on it very hard and wasn't very much involved despite having deployed J.D. Vance twice to Indiana, made countless phone calls, and issued a relentless stream of threats. This is textbook authoritarian behavior, and the academic research is unequivocal here, because psychological processes called habituation and escalation of commitment bind followers to their leader, giving Trumpism qualities of a cult, as a person's immense loyalty results from small escalations of personal commitment where people begin to identify with the group and feel accountable, especially to the leader. Trump has nominated people for key offices that have personal loyalty to Trump, an understanding of modern media, involvement in serious scandals, and a desire to use the power of the state to punish political opponents. A January 2025 CNN poll found that 53% of Republicans viewed loyalty to Trump as central to their political identity and very important to what being a Republican is, beating values such as a less powerful federal government or supporting congressional Republicans. So when Trump publicly mocks Rand Paul as an automatic no vote in what should be a moment of bipartisan celebration, he's not just being petty. He's enforcing compliance through public humiliation. He's reminding everyone that independents will be punished, and he's demonstrating that Paul was the lone GOP holdout against Trump's big policy bill over spending concerns, and Paul believes the party has become more a party about loyalty to one person, and I think that it is a problem. The fact that Paul would say this out loud, that he would publicly acknowledge what everyone already knows, makes him dangerous to the authoritarian project, because authoritarianism depends on everyone pretending that dear leader is beloved by choice rather than through coercion. What's happening right now in Congress exemplifies this dynamic perfectly, because a year after Trump's election, and with midterms looming, this arrangement is showing signs of wearing on some congressional Republicans who suddenly want to actually legislate, with some not running for re-election and having nothing to lose while others want something to show for themselves when Trump is not on the ballot. But they are, even hardcore Trump allies are getting restless, with Senator Josh Hawley saying Congress really has to act, and I think you've seen a Congress that has not been as enthusiastic about his agenda as I would like. While Senator John Kennedy complained, we passed one big beautiful bill then nothing, zero, zilch, nada, adding we've been sitting on our ice-cold lazy butts instead of passing his agenda. The civil war within the GOP is real, and it's intensifying, and you can see it in how Paul has emerged as a thorn in Trump's side at a time when most elected Republicans are either America First true believers or traditional conservatives who have bent the knee, and Trump and Paul have a history of acrimony from when they sought the 2016 nomination, with Trump opening a debate by ridiculing Paul, saying Rand Paul shouldn't even be on this stage because he's got 1% in the polls. That kind of public humiliation is Trump's signature move, his go-to weapon, the way he maintains dominance over a party that has completely surrendered its institutional independence and ideological coherence in exchange for proximity to power. But here's the truly chilling part, and I need you to grasp the full implications, because what Trump is doing isn't just crude bullying, it's sophisticated authoritarian statecraft. The story of Trump's first 7 months back in office is the consolidation of power, as he has bulldozed obstacles that stood in his way in his first term, and constantly tested boundaries in pursuit of more authority, making no secret of his disregard for the limits of his power and governing accordingly. The man is currently claiming emergency powers over tariffs which the Constitution gives to Congress, wielding an ever-changing level of taxation on American businesses and consumers, and has neutered Congress to run the country like an all-powerful executive, while the GOP-controlled Congress apparently wants no part of stopping their party's standard-bearer, despite Republicans traditionally not liking tariffs. This is what Democratic backsliding looks like from the inside, and the Rand Paul humiliation is a perfect microcosm of the entire rotten system, because it demonstrates in one casual moment how thoroughly Trump has transformed the Republican Party from a political organization with principles and procedures into a vehicle for his personal aggrandizement, where every member understands that the price of membership is absolute submission. Trump recently came away from calling Democratic lawmakers traitors, looking unpresidential, prompting a Republican insider to ask, is it appropriate for the President of the United States to say that senators are treasonous? No. Yet Trump continues escalating because that's what authoritarians do. They constantly test boundaries, they normalize the previously unthinkable, they make yesterday's outrage seem quaint compared to today's provocation. And I want you to sit with the cognitive dissonance Paul himself must be experiencing, because here's a man who voted for Trump 3 times, who tries to work within the system, who occasionally votes with Trump while maintaining enough independence to be called a thorn, and what does he get for his trouble? Public mockery, threats of primary challenges, being labeled actually crazy by the sitting president, and the soul-crushing realization that Trump needs to change his tone and be more positive, but instead remains fixated on maintaining Republican congressional majorities through any means necessary. One Indiana Republican senator who opposed Trump's redistricting scheme observed that you wouldn't change minds by being mean, and the efforts were mean-spirited from the get-go, suggesting that if you were wanting to change votes, you would probably try to explain why we should be doing this in a positive way, which reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of Trump's project, because Trump doesn't want to persuade, he wants to dominate, he doesn't seek consensus, he demands submission. The historical parallels are not subtle here, and anyone who has studied authoritarian movements recognizes the pattern because right-wing strongmen who populated the last 100 years were helped into power by conservatives who believed they could outfox populist demagogues, but Italian and German conservatives quickly discovered they were being controlled, and the Nazis demanded loyalty but were disloyal in return, because those who view law, procedure, and custom as impediments to power have little in common with people who are democratically inclined. The casual cruelty, the performative dominance displays, the insistence that everyone publicly demonstrate their fealty, these are not bugs in the authoritarian system, they are features, they are how the system maintains itself through a combination of fear and complicity. What makes Trump's mockery of Rand Paul so perfect as a teaching moment is that it happened in the context of praising bipartisan cooperation, which reveals the fundamentally cynical nature of Trump's entire political project, because he doesn't actually care about policy outcomes or legislative achievements, except insofar as they serve his personal interests and ego gratification. The man can't even let a unanimous vote stand as a moment of unity without injecting his petty grievances and reminding everyone that some people's votes count more than others in his authoritarian calculus, that loyalty to Trump matters more than any legislative accomplishment, that even when you vote yes, if you've ever voted no, you'll be marked forever as suspect. And here's what terrifies me about where we are right now in December 2025, because the Indiana redistricting fight shows that there are still some Republicans willing to resist Trump's most brazen power grabs. A pressure campaign waged by the White House and its allies had backfired, with redistricting advocates' efforts ultimately backfiring and hardening opposition in the Senate. But how long can that resistance last when Trump was caught on a hot mic blasting Republicans saying, "I can't appoint anybody. I can't appoint anybody. Everybody I've appointed, their time has expired. Then they're in default. Then we're losing," and expressing frustration with basic democratic constraints on his power. The authoritarian mindset cannot tolerate limits, cannot accept that other branches of government have legitimate authority, cannot conceive of a political order that doesn't center entirely on the leader's will. What Paul represents, and why Trump cannot resist humiliating him, is the last dying ember of a conservatism that believed in limited government, fiscal responsibility, and institutional constraints on executive power. Paul is an intellectual disciple of the Chicago School of Economics associated with Milton Friedman, arguing for laissez-faire policy, while Trump has ushered in national populism with protectionist policies as a pillar of his agenda. These are fundamentally incompatible worldviews, which means Paul's continued presence in the Republican caucus is a constant reminder that the party once stood for something other than Trump worship, and authoritarians hate nothing more than being reminded that alternative frameworks exist. The darkest implication of Trump's casual cruelty toward Paul is what it signals about the future, because if Trump will publicly humiliate a sitting Republican senator who voted with him on a bill while praising his wife in the very same breath, imagine what he'll do to those who oppose him more consistently or more vocally. And Trump recently accused Democratic lawmakers of seditious behavior punishable by death, while Paul called it reckless, inappropriate, irresponsible. Senate Majority Leader John Thune called Democrats' video urging military resistance to illegal orders clearly provocative, but said, "I certainly don't agree with the president's conclusion on how we ought to handle it." Even mild pushback from Republican leadership is noteworthy because it's so vanishingly rare, but notice that it's always couched in the most deferential terms, always carefully calibrated not to trigger Trump's wrath, always stopping short of actually using institutional power to constrain the president. This is how authoritarianism advances, not through dramatic coups or violent seizures of power, but through the slow accumulation of humiliations and capitulations, through the gradual normalization of cruelty and contempt for democratic norms, through the systematic destruction of any space for dissent or independent thought within the governing coalition. Every time Trump publicly mocks someone like Rand Paul and faces no consequences, every time he threatens senators and they fold, every time he claims powers that belong to Congress and Congress does nothing, the authoritarian project advances another step. The boundaries of acceptable behavior shift further toward autocracy, and the institutions that are supposed to check executive power reveal themselves to be hollow shells. We are living through a profound constitutional crisis disguised as political theater, and Trump's mockery of Rand Paul is a perfect encapsulation of everything that's wrong, because it demonstrates that within the Republican Party, there is no longer any principled space for disagreement, no zone of protected conscience, no recognition that loyalty to constitutional principles might sometimes require opposition to presidential preferences. Some Republicans are emphasizing the need for genuine oversight of Trump's controversial actions, with former House Foreign Affairs Chairman Michael McCaul saying Defense Secretary Hegseth should testify and noting, "We are a separate but equal branch of government under Article 1 of the Constitution," an attitude that's been largely absent over the last 11 months. But this flicker of institutional self-respect may be too little too late, given how thoroughly Trump has already consolidated power. The tragedy of Rand Paul is that he represents what could have been a Republican Party that actually believed in the limited government principles it claimed to champion, that would check executive overreach regardless of which party held the White House, that would prioritize constitutional fidelity over partisan loyalty. But that party is dead, and Trump killed it, and we watched it happen, and now we're left with this authoritarian personality cult, where being called an automatic no vote in front of the entire political establishment is the price you pay for occasionally exercising independent judgment. The casual cruelty is the point, the public humiliation is the mechanism of control, and the complicit silence of everyone else in the room is the real story, because it shows that the authoritarian transformation is essentially complete, that the Republican Party has become Trump's party in every sense, and that American democracy is in far graver danger than most people realize, because one of our two major political parties has abandoned democratic governance in favor of authoritarian submission. This moment will be remembered, this seemingly small instance of petty vindictiveness and calculated cruelty, because it captures everything about how democracies die from within, not with jackboots and midnight arrests, but with laughter and applause, not through violent repression, but through the steady erosion of dignity and principle, not by silencing all dissent at once, but by making dissent so costly and so lonely that eventually no one dares speak up at all. Trump called Rand Paul an automatic no vote, and everyone laughed, and that laughter is the sound of a party, and perhaps a country, surrendering to authoritarianism one humiliation at a time, one capitulation at a time, one destroyed norm at a time, until one day we wake up and realize that the democracy we thought we had was just a memory, and nobody can quite remember when exactly we lost it, because it happened so gradually and so publicly, and with so much applause.